Welcome to the final podcast. This is the second part of the California Politics podcast. So, the initiative process is something I wanted to talk about more in detail. It's what we're known for in California politics. We use it more than any other state in the union. So, as you learned about it in your book, the direct democracy process came to us in 1911 with the election of Governor Hiram Johnson. He ran on that platform, and he was one of the leaders of the progressive movement, which was advocating this. It was a populist movement grounded in the notion that people had to take back government from entrenched corporate interests, especially from those people we called robber barons, or the powerful owners of the railroad that had for a couple decades called all the shots in the legislature, pretty much determined the outcome of elections. So it's a bit ironic that a process that was born in the spirit of grassroots politics, where people could petition government directly, has really been twisted over the last 100 years into a system owned by powerful interests that can throw millions of dollars into these initiative campaigns. And these laws are often designed not for a broad constituency, but to please these particular special interests that are funding the campaigns. We have this parallel lawmaking institution now that was supposed to be kind of a stopgap measure to check legislatures. Remember, we like to have checks on our branches of government, so this was one way to check the legislators if they would not listen to public opinion. But my question is, where is the check on this particular system? In theory, the ultimate check is the voters, I suppose, and you might be glad to know that the voters do actually check these initiatives when they come by them. Only a third of all initiatives have ever passed. So the voters are not always fooled into passing terrible laws, but on the other hand, it has happened quite often. Just take Proposition 8, which banned gay marriage in the state in 2008. Many of you from your forum posts have said you were opposed to it, and a lot of people in your age group were actually opposed to it. And this was law until it was overturned this year by the Supreme Court. But it was a law that passed even due to a well-funded campaign. Your book says $83 million total was spent on the campaign. And there were powerful interests that kind of pushed it over the edge and got it passed in that year. So the system, which had this great idea of grassroots campaigns in which popular sentiment could maybe lead to a proposition, it actually never really existed in reality, or never came to fruition, I should say. And that's because there's some very high bars to qualify an initiative in the first place for a ballot. So let's think of your favorite issue. A lot of you were for the environment, so maybe this would be an initiative that protects and conserves the environment. Where would you start with that? Well, first you must gather enough signatures of registered voters to qualify your proposal. And that's going to mean either 5% or 8% of the total number of voters of the last gubernatorial election. 5% is required if you want a statutory law, and 8% is going to be the mark if you want to add an amendment to the California Constitution. So that means if you're going for 5%, you have to get 500,000 signatures of real voters. If you're going for 8%, that's 807,000 signatures. Now, the next problem is you have only 150 days to do this. And you're going to want to collect a lot more than that required number of signatures, just in case some of the signatures are declared invalid, or maybe you got signatures of people who weren't registered voters. And so the bottom line is it's impossible to collect these signatures with just a band of volunteers. So somebody tells you the best way to do this is to pay somebody else $1 or $2 a signature to collect them for you. Well, you can do the math. That's a pretty big bill. You might be paying $2 million just to qualify your initiative before it even gets on the ballot. So let's say you have your signatures verified by the Secretary of State, you pass that bar, now you need to fund your campaign. And you can expect to spend between $30 to $50 million just for your side if it's a controversial proposition. So you better call some of your rich friends. Now, why would you want to even propose something like this or get a proposition on the ballot? Well, one reason is it's a lot easier to get something passed when you only need 50% plus one vote to get that law passed. And you can go around the legislature to do this. If you wanted to get, let's say, pass a new tax to raise funds to protect the environment, well, you're going to have to get 2/3 of the legislature to agree on that. That's the supermajority requirement we have in California to raise new taxes. So there's going to be Republicans who oppose any new tax. They'll often block these efforts. If you want to pass a school bond, even that requires 55%. So if you're sitting down at a strategy table, your chances might be better if you go to the initiative route. You just need a lot of money to do so. So that's the first tool of direct democracy. The second tool, which is used much less often than the initiative, is the referendum. We have the ability to petition to repeal or approve laws that the legislature has passed, and you would have to collect signatures the same way you would for an initiative. But this happens rarely. There have only been 47 of these since 1912. What we see much more often at the ballot box is the automatic referendum we have for bond measures. These are laws passed by the legislature that borrow money for large government-sponsored projects, and the Constitution says that voters must approve or reject bond measures over $300,000. And these are usually less controversial than other initiatives, so most of these measures, around 60%, actually do pass. Finally, the recall is the last tool of direct democracy. We're only one of 19 states that allow voters to remove or replace officials in between elections. And this is used fairly rarely. Only 5 recall elections have ever been successful since 1912. But of course, many of you might remember one of them, which was the 2003 recall of Governor Gray Davis. And in that same election, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger came to replace him. But if you wanted to do this again, to recall the governor, you must get 12% of the last election's voting total for that office to qualify a recall. For the governor, that would be 1.2 million signatures. That's the highest bar yet, if you wanted to recall the governor. So again, it's an expensive proposition to even consider this. You would have to spend at least several $1,000,000 just to qualify the recall, and then worry about spending money on the campaign later. And remember, you still have to get signatures verified. You'll often have bad signatures on your list, so you may have to collect 1.5 million. I should add that counties and cities also have the power of direct democracy. They can petition to put measures on the ballot that then become municipal law, and there are similar rules to the state initiative system I just described. And some cities, like San Francisco, are especially fond of putting all sorts of local measures on the ballot. So we have this strange hybrid democracy in California. It's a system that has spawned an entire industry in Sacramento with professionals that cater to very deep-pocketed special interests. And by the way, I would comment that it's made the California Constitution what I would call a complete mess. The U.S. Constitution has only been amended 27 times, as you know, in 250 years, because it's so hard to amend it. While our Constitution, California Constitution, has been rewritten several times, but it's been amended, the last one was amended more than 400 times. And many of those amendments come from direct democracy. So it's quite a tangled mess, and a long Constitution as well. So why wouldn't we want to reform a system like this when we have wealthy donors running kind of vanity initiatives that might confuse voters? Well, direct democracy is still sacred in this state, to put it mildly. Voters do not want to give up the power they have, even if it's not truly the populist tool that it was originally envisioned to be. So I would check out page 35 It has some good suggestions on the ways we could reform this system. And there are lots of them. I won't go through them all here, but the bottom line is these reforms have gone nowhere because people see this initiative system as the last check on government. And whether that's logical or not, we don't want to entertain changes to that system. Let's turn quickly to the budget process, which is in Chapter 8 of your book. Now, budgets may sound boring to some of you, but let me tell you, that process has a direct impact on your daily life, especially if you're a student in the CSU system. So it's something you should pay attention to. We spend about $100 billion every year in this state. That's rising every year. And much of that is taken up by mandatory spending. Every year there might only be even 10% of the total budget that we call discretionary spending that legislators can fight over. But the budget process starts at the beginning of the year when the governor submits the budget to the legislature. January 10th is the deadline. Then it's looked over by the Legislative Analyst's Office. That's a nonpartisan research arm of the government. And once new figures come in on actual tax receipts for the year, like how much money is the state going to bring in, there's a May revise that is sent to the legislature, and that goes through the traditional legislative process. That's committee hearings and, of course, a vote. But before that, there's a negotiation process that goes on between the top leaders of the executive and the legislative branches. So that's the governor, of course, on the executive side, and the two top leaders of each house, the Senate President Pro Tem and the Speaker of the Assembly. They call these three people the Big Three because they have the most power in the budget negotiations. And currently they're all Democrats, since Democrats dominate in both houses. But prior to 2010, before we passed a law changing this, there was a 2/3 vote required to pass the budget instead of a simple majority. So we had the Big Five, which had to include the leaders of the Republican Party in both houses. Problem was, the two parties were usually so far apart on spending priorities, especially recently, that we often did not have an agreement during the Schwarzenegger era. The budget would either be late or wouldn't pass at all. Now, some of you who are worried about K through 12 and higher education in the state might be surprised to look at the pie chart in your book and see that education is actually the area we spend the most money on in the entire budget, to the tune of 35.6%. That's close to $45 billion with a B. And then we have health and human services. That's the next biggest slice at about 29% of the total budget. So we have this problem in budgeting that the federal level also has, which is that we value those two things we spend the most money on. We desperately do not want to cut them, especially if you're a Democrat, you would think this. But we also don't have the political will to impose new taxes on ourselves, to fill gaps in revenue that come during bad economic times, like the ones we just saw. Or maybe we're still seeing. On this score, the initiative system might help us, because remember, we only need 50% plus one to impose a tax with an initiative. But if we went to the legislature, they're constrained by Prop 13, that law passed in 1978, which requires a 2/3 majority to raise any taxes or fees. Interestingly, the Democrats entered this year they actually achieved the 2/3 majority. It's the first time one party has been so dominant in both houses in 80 years. And a lot of people thought there would be a flurry of new taxes imposed to balance the budget, or maybe raise new revenues for spending projects that Democrats would have. But the reality is no party, even the Democrats, wants to be accused of overtaxing the people. So that scenario has actually not become a reality. We also kind of let them off the hook with Prop 30. This was the initiative passed in November 2012, in which the people themselves agreed to impose temporary taxes, including a 1-cent sales tax, in order to avoid deep cuts to higher education. So you can thank the voters for that one if you're in the CSU system. At least for now, there will not be the kind of deep cuts that everybody was expecting. So something to ponder about California politics as we leave ask yourself the question that Van Vechten was asking, which is California truly ungovernable, given all of these constraints we've talked about and the direct democracy system? As citizens of this state, you must decide for yourself whether you think these constraints that we put on ourselves are either keeping us from moving forward, or maybe we like some of these restrictions because we don't want government to grow with no end in sight and overtax regular folks. To me, there's clear evidence that with some tweaks, especially in the direct democracy system, we could do a lot better policy-wise, and we could certainly limit the takeover of the initiative system by an industry based in Sacramento that really only has an interest in finding more wealthy clients to pay for more initiatives that are going to confuse voters on the ballot. Thanks for a good semester, and good luck on the rest of the course.